I learned about psychological activism as a child. You see, I grew up in a home with a father who was violent, with his words, with his voice, with his fists, and with a mother who was powerfully disempowered. That means she couldn't protect and she couldn't bear witness. She couldn't notice and see what was happening. That was too much for her. So I learned what it was like to be less powerful and unseen. And somehow the empathy in me led me to want to do a few different things. One was to become friends with other children who had no friends. I saw that they were pushed aside, were suffering often, were withdrawn. And then I ended up fighting with my father about racism. I empathized with the black condition even early without understanding it. I didn't like my father's bruising words as they bruised me. And I didn't like the sense of them being unseen, not understood the way my mother did. And then I ended up connecting with friends and wondering what was going on inside of them, the voices inside of them that were marginalized. So all those things happened out of that condition. And out of that, I can now say I became, well, those were the beginnings of being a psychological activist. What is a psychological activist? It's a person who's an ally then of what is unheard, what is unseen, what is suppressed, what is voiceless, what is marginalized. To be an ally means three things to me. You listen, so you hear those voices. They're not only easily heard, because they're not given a megaphone. You bear witness, that means you really see and you notice what that condition is, and you advocate for that voice, so that voice is raised up as a democratic empowerment, so that the voice is heard equally in the inside or the culture at large. In my research, I have learned that bearing witness has two different approaches. One which is loving, I would call, a loving witness, a witness that bears in order to create more justice or love, and a witness that shames. A witness that loves, sees, as I was implying, really notices. I saw what was happening. I heard what was happening. I saw the details of that blow. I heard the words that people said to you. I hear how the culture treats you. I see that. And the second is to believe the person. It has two levels: really believing what the person is saying is their experience, but then believing in the person. I believe in who you are as a person, as a group. I believe in your humanity, your beauty, your intelligence, your spiritual authority that rests inside of you. And then to feel. I have a feeling reaction that communicates a humanness to you. So when a person or group is hurt, then when I feel for that, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I shed tears, I'm frustrated, I'm upset, that tells the person you're worthy of being borne witness to. Your humanity, your beauty is seen. So that is the positive form of bearing witness. The negative form shames, and as a psychological witness, shame is one of the most important things to understand, because it does a great damage to the injury. Just like my mother did a damage to me by not bearing witness to me, the culture does the same thing. It does that in three ways. It either dismisses, that's not a big deal, it didn't really happen that much, why are you making a big deal about that? It makes something smaller out of a great injury. Or it denies, that's not really true, racism doesn't exist, that's not like that anymore, that didn't happen to you. That denial also impacts the trauma. And then the third thing is it blames. Why did you do that? Why were you wearing that? Why did you say that? Why did you break that window? You're doing something that's worthy of that being hurt. Those three things combine into a kind of an infected bandage that wraps itself around the injury and infects it, re-traumatizes it. So even if an injury was 200 years ago, when it's dismissed, denied, and the person is blamed, it re-traumatizes, it makes more hurt, it keeps that injury going. That's part of the psychology of being able to be an activist. So I practice two forms of activism. With the individual, I think of myself as an inner activist. I'm trying to listen and advocate for what is unheard even in that person, So I use the methods that I spoke about, their patterns, their addictions, their deep feelings, their body symptoms, and I'm looking to listen to those to usher forth what I call sustainable change or deep change. Why do I call that sustainable change? Because often people are trying to restore their status quo, put me back together, lift me back up if I'm depressed, make me less angry if I'm angry, help me continue the way I want to continue, not have so many conflicts, make things easier on me. That's great, but it's not activism. That's just restoring a person. Many people do that. My work is to help revision the person's life so their whole status quo can change. Not many people want that. Sometimes patterns happen for so long and pains happen for so long that they start looking for that. But many other approaches are not sustainable because the things that lead to disturbing the status quo in them, those voices that are unheard, come back and say, wait a second, you still haven't listened to me. I'm asking you to change something more fundamentally, to change your life, to become a more authentic human being. The other place I practice psychological activism is with the culture at large. The main way I do that is to help people build relationship and community across lines of diversity. To me, that's perhaps the most important activist event, practice that we can engage in. Why? Why that versus protesting, marching, petitioning? Those are great. Yes to those. But as a psychological activist, I know that we need to change hearts and minds so that those views bubble up inside the psyche, inside the consciousness of a person and culture. So we're learning to see things differently. That's going to be more sustainable even than legislation, which we know doesn't only affect how things actually look. It also creates dialogue. Dialogue across lines of diversity is something we need. People keep on saying, have a conversation about race, about anti-Semitism, about homophobia, about whatever it is. We don't know how to have conversations. That we need to learn that. So to help people have that dialogue, interact in some kind of respectful way, even when there's strong feelings. That's my greatest urge as a psychological activist. But I also speak and teach. And the main way that I speak, the main way I teach is to write. Of course, I enter the classroom and do workshops, but to write is an important impulse in me. I've always wanted to write. In fact, I just published my second book. My first book was called Talking Back to Dr. Phil. I emphasize the talking back because talking back is an activist impulse. I'm resisting. I was talking back to Dr. Phil as a representative of mainstream popular psychological thinking that doesn't look to change the status quo. It doesn't look as deep as it can inside the person so that what is brought out of them can change them in a deep way. It tends to restore and normalize a person. That's just not enough. So I take on Dr. Phil about all kinds of issues, including his views about women and black folks, because he tends to not see those issues as connected to sexism and racism and how that affects the individual psychology. And my new book is really broad. It's called Revisioning Activism, and there I start with issues of racism and sexism from a psychological activist point of view, not just from the cultural, the petitioning point of view. I'm trying to see what's going on inside the culture, the hearts and minds. Then I take on popular psychology and look again, as I did with Dr. Phil, only go deeper into psychology's limits, its misuse of labeling, its tendency again to normalize rather than look for deep change and sustainable change inside of people. Then I take on current events and look at issues like Lance Armstrong's lying, how is that part of the culture, or Robin Williams' depression and the suicidality, what that has to do with the culture. So I'm looking psychologically at what the culture is involved, how the culture is involved in those particular difficulties. And then I look at sexism as part of what women do to themselves internally, what's been internalized through diet issues, etc. So the book takes on all those four categories.